A mostly quiet but key former policy mind for the African National Congress. But Joel Netshitenzhe is now finishing a longer sentence, first started by former US Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool. Now with the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, or MISTRA for short, it's the same think tank that facilitated a webinar that saw Rasool utter controversial comments about US President Donald Trump. Netshitenzhe echoed much of Rasool's sentiment at a Standard Bank-sponsored event just this week. Now, business journalist Garth Tiernison was there, and he joins us live now from our Johannesburg newsroom studios for his debut edition of The Lead. Garth, welcome.
Thanks, Graham.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining The Lead. I really appreciate it. What was this event all about? I did see in today's report on News 24 Business, Garth, that essentially was about the cost of capital in Africa. What was it all about, and who were the main speakers other than Joel?
So it was a fairly staid banking event where the majority of the discussion revolved around the high borrowing costs that African nations face when they try to borrow in the debt capital markets. Put simply, when they try and sell bonds, the yields that people demand in order to hold those bonds are pretty high. That translates into high interest repayments, which puts a huge burden on a lot of African economies. And much of the discussion was really about what Africa can do in order to get those borrowing costs lowered. And I kind of joked at the event. I said it was a good mix of whining and common sense, because it started off with a lot of kind of indignant moaning about African nations just being treated unfairly. And as the event progressed, there was more and more kind of admission that a lot of the nations really have to just get their own economic and political house in order, and perhaps that will help lower those costs. I am looking to write something on that, which I'm potentially investigating at the moment. But that was really the main theme of the event. So a pretty stock standard, dare I say, boring banking event.
Boring until Joel Netshitenzhe started to espouse a lot more of the background thinking when it comes to policy, and obviously he's freed from the constructs of the ANC in a sense to speak on behalf of this particular think tank, right? He's an excellent policy mind. He often gets touted as such. If you have people like Trevor Manuel in the past saying, the ANC has fantastic and South Africa has fantastic policies on paper, it's often the case that the issue lies with implementation, right? But let's begin with what Joel said essentially about the world order as we know it. A lot of what he was saying, and I can quote some of that verbatim from what Rasool said at a previous webinar that got him in sort of hot water. What were the main things that Joel was sort of saying about where we find ourselves? Obviously talking about the Trump administration, the big elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, it kind of came up casually in a panel discussion where the state of the world and the polarization we're seeing across the world came up in conversation. And Joel Netshitenzhe immediately brought up the rise of right-wing populism in Europe, and particularly the US, and said to him that was actually the thing that worried him the most about what was going on in the world. And of course, just prior to that, he'd spoken about all the military conflicts and how that was diverting financial aid from Africa to these military events. But he felt he was far more worried about the rise of right-wing populism. And then at one point he said, much of the discourse borders on white supremacy, and you kind of sense a ripple go through the audience because, as I said, it was a boring banking conference, and then he said that, and I immediately made the connection to the Rasool comments, as you have rightly pointed out, that Rasool made very similar comments and ended up getting kicked out of the US. So I obviously, my journalistic ears pricked up and made sure I had everything down. But the panelists obviously, understandably, immediately shifted back to the main topic of conversation. So they didn't go down the full rabbit hole of that. But clearly, it's something that he sees as a big concern.
And obviously he represents Mistra, and the webinar that Rasul attended, which, we made those comments and landed himself in hot water, was also coordinated by Mistra. And I thought I'd just quickly quote verbatim what Ibrahim Rasul, said at that particular webinar, quote unquote. The second discontinuity is almost that I think what Donald Trump is launching is an assault on incumbency, those who are in power, by mobilizing a supremacism against the incumbency at home. And I think I've illustrated that abroad as well. And then he says, in terms of that supremacist assault on incumbency, we see it at the domestic politics of the USA, the MAGA movement, the Make America Great movement, etc., etc. So, I mean, Rasul didn't necessarily say white supremacism. Yeah, we have Joel saying sort of, outright, white supremacism. It's basically the same hymn sheet, if you will. And then Joel also kind of joked that he wasn't sort of, held back by being a diplomat, that he could make those comments, right, Garth?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that elicited chuckles in the audience, because as you said just now, the kind of governmental shackles are lifted off of him. But the fact remains is that he's still a long-standing former NEC member, and he was as you said, he was a policy maestro at that party, and it'd be interesting to see how the US responds, if they respond at all. But given how quickly they responded to the Rasul comments, I'd be surprised if nothing comes out of this. But I certainly will be keeping tabs on it.
In the context of how we understand everything at the moment, look, we're barreling towards the Trump tariffs by midnight tonight, right, Garth? The 30% punitive tariff should come into effect.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, that's the dateline or the timestamp when it the goods actually get hit with those charges. I've tried to get a better understanding from the presidency and from government, what exactly are the stumbling blocks as to why we can't seem to get a better deal with the US. They've been a bit coy around it. The party line is that everyone's under a non-disclosure, but the backdrop is that allegedly the US has set these several preconditions, saying, if you want to trade with us, you've got to see to certain things. The presidency's denied it, but it seems to be seeping out into the public discourse that at least one of these impediments is BEE.
100%, and that was sort of confirmed by this Afrikaner delegation with the Freedom Front Plus party's involvement as they went to the White House and came back and sort of gave that press conference, correct me if I'm wrong, that BBBE was one of the policy issues, essentially on paper, that the US Trump administration's got a problem with. And that's now part of the discourse that's been confirmed, right?
Well, I don't know if I go so far as to say it's been confirmed, but this delegation was the first to kind of, to my knowledge, come out and publicly state that the US had set four preconditions. The one being BE, which apparently they don't want US companies to be faced with. They want the ANC, not government, the ANC allegedly to distance itself from the kill the Boer, kill the farmer slogan. They want expropriation to only happen for fair market-related compensation, and supposedly they want farmer tax made a priority crime. So I saw this come out, and my immediate thought was, well, if this is true, it's kind of a big deal, so we need to investigate it. And if it's not true, well, then it needs to be debunked, and obviously, that needs to be exposed. So I ended up getting in touch with Corné Mulder, who, as you know, is in the Freedom Front, which is part of the GNU. And I had quite a lengthy conversation with him, and he swears blind that it's senior members within the Trump administration that communicated these alleged four preconditions to them. He also claimed that he had heard, although separately, that there's a fifth precondition that the US apparently wants South Africa to normalize its relations with Israel, whatever normalize means. I assume they want a more friendly stance towards Israel from the South African government. And I immediately approached the presidency. I asked them, is this true? And they flat out said, no, it's coming from the Freedom Front, and they have had no communication directly through formal channels that the US wants these preconditions. But subsequent to that, a senior, I think it was the DG of the department, it was the DG of DERCO, Zane Dangle, who said recently at an event that BE was indeed one of the stumbling blocks. And then I think it was just yesterday that Fikile Mbalula gave a feedback on the recent ANC NEC meeting over the weekend, and he also came out and said, well, we're not going to reverse the gains of transformation. So he kind of inadvertently confirmed that BE at least it does seem to be a sticking point. But it's interesting that to my knowledge, neither the US government nor the South African government have formally put out a statement saying that this is an issue, to my knowledge.
Right, because it's probably a very prickly diplomatic affair, right? And from the stance of the South African presidency and Pretoria's point of view, they don't, and we've seen this previously said out loud, doesn't like the fact that any other delegation or any other person representing South Africa that has not been sort of cleared by the presidency can go over and, hold talks with the White House. Let's move that aside for now. It's a very interesting discussion. A lot of it already out in the ether. One of the most interesting points, though, of the evening, in line with this banking sort of summit, was when Netshitenzhe he came out and took this big swipe at mining companies, and he's alleged that they've been the local mining companies have been blocking attempts to launch a platinum group metals exchange in South Africa to create a platform for that to happen. We know that the US wants a lot of our precious group metals. It's one of our key outputs, right? So what exactly is an exchange like this? Why is it such a hot talking point?
So the Mapungubwe Institute has done a lot of research into how South Africa can beneficiate the minerals that it exports. At one point, Netshitenzhe spoke about South Africa exporting dust and stones, and he obviously is trying to get more industrial capacity in the local economy and get us to start doing stuff with that dust and stones instead of exporting it and then importing it back. And at one point he said, but beneficiation can also take the form of financial beneficiation, where you're trading these commodities on an exchange, and from that you can get all sorts of financial derivatives and financial products that can be spun off of this physical trade in goods and services. Because in PGMs, because a lot of the financial instruments that get traded in international markets are not actually the physical goods, but they're essentially contracts that give you rights to either buy or sell an underlying commodity. And I think he's trying to promote that as an idea locally. So we have approached the JSE for comment, and initially we couldn't get anything out of them, but they came back to me this morning with a kind of one-liner saying, look, we've been investigating this for 10 years and we're happy to do anything that's good for the country, which isn't much of an answer, but that's what they've come back with. I'm trying to get a follow-up interview with Joel Netshitenzhe to further unpack this, and we've also approached some of the platinum producers locally, asking them for their comments. So we're hoping to do a follow-up story where we can delve into this a little bit more deeply. But one thing did strike me. I went onto the Mapungubwe Institute's website, and if you click on donors, two of the donors are major platinum producers, so I found that kind of interesting. But hopefully I can unpack that further once I get a follow-up interview with Joel Netshitenzhe.
It's a fascinating aspect of the business realm at the moment, because the world wants our precious group metals. We have a lot of it. It's one of our key outputs to the US, correct? We've got a big stake in it, and it is one of our, for the lack of a better term, foreign trade trump cards, if you will. What are these, according to Netshitenzhe, what are these local mineral companies thus doing? Are they then, in his words, allegedly then rather going to China?
Well, he was pretty vague on how on what sort of obstruction they were really engaged in, and this is why I want to try and interview him again to get to further unpack this. But one of the things he did mention is he said they'd rather go to China and help China set up a PGM exchange in Shanghai rather than set one up locally, which is a pretty big claim. So we certainly are going to try and delve into that further and get to the bottom of it. But obviously, it's reliant on some of the parties coming back to us. But the interesting thing is, South Africa has something like 80% or more than 80% of the known platinum group metal reserves. And the only other two countries, to my knowledge, that have significant PGM reserves are Russia and Zimbabwe. Which you could argue are probably bigger pariah states in the eyes of the West than we are. So we are pretty much the dominant supplier globally of PGMs. And I guess Netshitenzhe does have a point. Why do we not have a PGM exchange locally?
And why isn't that not benefiting the people at the end of the day, right? Is also a very interesting thought to have in itself. And it's just so difficult when we're obviously dealing with a world geopolitical economy that is obviously it's meant to be so neoliberal. But under the Trump administration, we can now, with these tariffs, obviously, countries are cloistering up, and it's getting tense out there, and it's getting difficult to obviously start new markets, right? What are the bigger takeaways from the summit that we should have noted about, or was Joel really the main standout speaker, Garth?
So I got the sense from the summit that there's going to be, and I'm trying to confirm this, so don't take this as verbatim, but I got the sense that there is going to be some sort of lobby made at the G20 summit that is going to happen in South Africa, I think in November of this year, where there's going to be some sort of attempt to formally get the G20's attention on Africa's viewpoint that is being unfairly charged, inordinately high interest rates when it borrows in debt capital markets offshore. The cynic in me goes, I'm not sure how effective that would be. I use the analogy of, that's like me walking into my local bank and kicking and screaming for a better interest rate on my home loan. I'm not sure that would work. But I did get the sense that there is going to be some sort of, at least attempt to get that topic on the G20 agenda. I have reached out to various players to try and confirm that and get more detail. But that seemed to be an underlying theme at the summit yesterday.
Right. I'm about to let you go, Garth, and I just apologies for this. On my previous thought, in terms of these precious group metals that South Africa has abundance of and the world really needs, what are their future utilities, or what are they generally used for that makes them so, which makes them so attractive? Sorry.
Yeah, so the main use of PGMs at the moment is in cutting auto car emissions. So essentially, they get used in catalytic converters, and they're a key component in that. But of course, the world is moving slowly and steadily towards electric vehicles. And South Africa is trying to move with that by developing what is called the hydrogen economy. And apparently, I'm no guru on how this works further downstream, but platinum is also a key component in hydrogen powered vehicles and other sorts of automation. So we try to get, or we already have a key foothold in the catalytic converter market, and we're trying to obviously also develop this hydrogen economy, and PGMs are key there. But a quote, I think I read this when I was at university, it's something that always stands out in my mind is someone once said the Stone Age didn't end for a lack of stones, and it was said to people in the Middle East who've got an abundance of oil, saying, don't rest on your laurels because the world won't always run on oil. And I think before South Africans get too confident in the fact that 80% of PGMs are found here, there is always the possibility that there can be innovation and they could suddenly become far less relevant than they are today.
100%. At the end of it all, Garth, I'm just happy I still drive a vehicle with a carburetor engine. Old school, baby.
Well, I drive a diesel bucky, so I'm probably even worse.
Yeah, commiserations to you. I'm sorry that the diesel price just went up, brother.
True, this is true.
That's Garth Tennyson. Fantastic. I really appreciate you having on the lead today. His latest piece is one of our editor's top picks today, just for the sheer interest in specifically this PGM side of things. Joel Netshitenzhe slams white supremacy in global political discourse. And that's the article put out by Garth on our News 24 business team. Thank you so much for joining us on the lead today, and have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.